Valley View educators. Thank you for taking the time to view this video to learn of some of the updates from the PERA Joint Committee. We recognize that teacher evaluation or educator evaluation is one of the last things on your mind at this time when you're working to support your students from home and bring the school year to a close. So we do appreciate your time and attention to this. The PERA Joint Committee felt it was important that you were informed of some of these decisions, and hopefully some of these decisions are seen as a relief. That has been an effort of the PERA Joint Committee for quite some time in our ongoing discussions to find ways to improve and streamline the process to make it more efficient and effective, but yet still meaningful for everyone, for our educators and our evaluators. The PERA Joint Committee has been working at some of these decisions for quite some time. And I did want to set a little context for you that some of these decisions were made prior to our school closure. Actually, the majority of them were made prior to our school closure. And then we had to reconvene as a PERA Joint Committee to revisit those decisions and see if it was still in our best interest to carry forward or make some modifications. Today on our webinar, Judy Nash, our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, and Renee Calabrese, our Union President, are going to be going through some of these decisions. And we are also supported by all of our PJC members, and you can see the names here on the screen. These are individuals who have dedicated a great deal of time to these decisions. And I have to ensure that you know that these decisions were not taken lightly and there was given very careful consideration. We did prove and preview these decisions with our building reps and also our building administrators for feedback and input so that we could refine our communication or that we could bring additional clarity to some of the questions or perhaps there was something we missed. On the webinar today, we do have some additional PERA Joint Committee members that are here to support and offer any additional insight or perspective as we move through the communication that we have for you today. And I'd like to give them a moment to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Jody Ellis, principal of R.C. Hill Elementary School.
I'm Erica Judy, behavior interventionist at Bolingbrook High School and specialist consultant on PJC.
Rachel Delamorte, TLC at Humphrey Middle School.
Art Tansel, Jane Addams Union Rep.
Jared Ploger, legislative chair of the union and social studies teacher at Bolingbrook High School.
Renee Calabrese, first grade teacher at R.C. Hill and Valley View Council president.
Hi, I'm Judy Nash. I'm the assistant superintendent for human resources, and I am the facilitator of the PJC.
Okay, so before I turn it over to Renee and Judy, I did want to mention that you will have the written documents with this information to reference, and that we are here if you have any questions or need clarity on any of the information provided, and we will revisit this again in the fall as well. I do also want to mention that things are continuing to change on a daily basis, and while there's so much uncertainty, please rest assured that if there are changes either to our school year, to when we're able to attend, to the time that we're able to commit to the process or additional guidance from the state, we will revisit the decisions or reconvene as a PERA Joint Committee if we need to make adjustments. So for the time being, these are the most updated decisions that we have at this point in time, and we are able to support any questions that you may have after you absorb all of this information. So at this point, I will turn it over to Judy and Renee to go through some of the background and rationale of the key decisions.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again for taking your time to listen in today about some of the changes that we've made. I think Rachel gave some good context to the decisions that we've been making over the course of the last year. And I think we should probably even go back just a little bit more to 2015 when we first started this process. At that time, we put together a plan for teacher evaluation and assessment so that we could meet the requirements of the new PERA laws. And there were a lot of considerations back at that time that we made due to the culture at that time in our district of what we were living in. And so we set certain things up so that we could address those concerns. Over the last 5 years, the PERA Joint Committee has taken a lot of time to listen to voice, to watch our our district culture change and evolve. And we finally have come to the point where we are ready to make some significant changes to the plan. And those are what you're going to hear today. So the 5 big decisions that we made this year are on the screen right now. There are some changes that we've made to the categories of educators and what their student growth will look like. We've made some changes to the actual student growth, the types of student growth that we're using, the weighting and the requirements. We looked at some changes for our non-tenured educators and also some changes for our tenured educators with respect to student growth. And we also have made a switch back to the law with informal observations. So we'll talk a little bit about those as we continue on through this presentation. So I'll let Renee start off and talk about categories.
Hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us today. So the first decision that we wanted to share with you all today was in regards to some of the category changes. I have been a member of the PJC since we first started back in 2015. And as a member of that table, I sat there as a first grade teacher only. And we all had the motto and vision that we wanted everybody all in. We wanted everybody to have some skin in the game. And I know I personally felt that way, that if I had individuals pulling students out of my classroom to support them, that I wanted them to have just as much input as I did when it came to student growth. Over the years, things have changed. My shoes have changed, and now I don't represent myself as a first grade teacher. I represent the teachers in this district universally. We have heard from the membership loud and clear about some of the struggles and challenges that our related service providers specifically have faced when having to be compliant with 2 Type 3 assessments that we've had in the past. So as you can see here on your screen, we have made some significant changes to who falls in what categories. So category A is going to be our certified educators only. Category B is going to be our early childhood teachers, multi-needs, stellar, and STEP. And then category C, you can see the long list of educators that will only be required to have 100% professional practice, and there will not be any Type 1 or Type 2 assessments or Type 3 assessments tied to your evaluation. You will be based on 100% professional practice. If you also see at the top of the screen, you can see that we have changed the assessment itself. We are leaving Type 2 assessments behind for the time being, and we are going to a universal Type 1 for category A, which will be weighted at 5%, and a Type 3 at 25%. For category B, you can see that you will continue to have 2 Type 2 assessments, both of which will be valued at 15% each. And then category C will be 100% professional practice. Also, if you note at the bottom of category C, we'll talk a little bit about it later, but all non-tenured teachers in their first and second year of employment will also be 100% professional practice and will not have any student growth considered in their evaluation.
One thing that the PERA Joint Committee did discuss at length was, although we're removing the compliance factor of having the student growth be a portion of, a separate portion of the evaluation for those educators in category C, that student growth is a great deal of all of your practices and is definitely embedded and inherent in the professional practice portion of the evaluation, no matter what type of service you are providing. And so that shows itself through your practice, and it's definitely a part that is included. It's just not there as an additional compliance requirement to have separate Type 3s.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of a deeper dive into the student growth changes that we've made that Renee has previewed so far. So let's first talk about category A, and we've talked a little bit about who category A would be. Those are teachers, classroom teachers, teachers that have a roster of students. So, you know, a third grade teacher, a math teacher, special education teacher, a PE teacher, all of those teachers still fall into category A. With category A, we looked at different types of assessments, and you know that we have been operating over the past 5 years with a Type 2 assessment, which is a local common assessment. And we've worked hard in committees to develop common assessments for the purpose of looking at growth of our students. We've utilized those common assessments, though, as a type 2. And I want to stress that common assessments won't go away. We'll still be utilizing those in our regular practice because that's good practice to see how our kids are growing along the way of our instruction. But for the purpose of evaluation, we'll be looking at a type 1 and a type 3 assessment for category A educators. And I'll talk a little bit more later on about what a type 1 assessment really is, but just know that we'll be going to type 1 and type 3. We also made a change with the weighting. So in the past, we were 50-50, right? So 50% professional practice and 50% student growth. And you know that the student growth portion even had some professional practice embedded in it with the rubrics of things that we asked to upload with respect to participation in PLCs and the like. Well, moving forward, we'll be at a 70%, 30% weight for category A. And so what that will mean is 70% of your summative rating will be professional practice, and the other 30% will be the student growth. And that 30% is only data-based. So there will be no more of those professional practice rubrics that are embedded within that student growth portion. Now, the type 3 process will stay the same. So you'll still input a goal and have an interval and be collecting data at a baseline and targeting growth for students. But again, that professional practice rubric is removed. We'll talk a little bit more about what we will use for a rating later on in the presentation, but do know that because of the lack of state data that we recently have come into play here with the closure of school, that has changed a little bit about how we're going to have to look at that type 1 score for the next couple of years. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And once again, as Renee stated earlier, the weighting of the student growth for category A teachers is 25% will be your type 3, your SLO, and 5% will be that type 1 assessment.
This is an example, before we move on, of a decision that the PERA Joint Committee had made prior to the school closure and acknowledged that the state assessment system was going to be put on hold because our students were not in school. So we did reconvene and have a successful virtual meeting and decide that we would carry forward with keeping that type 1 as a portion of that 5%, and that when the time comes, we will revisit that as a parent joint committee to determine what exactly that will look like and what will be the associated value tables in terms of the expectations for growth. So now for the time being, though, we want to put that kind of type 1 aside since that is not in play at the moment, but we will revisit that when the time allows.
Okay, category B. So category B pretty much remains the same as it was previously. And there are a few categories of teachers who perhaps don't have a type 1-like assessment that can be used for their students. And so that's why they remain in category B. These educators will continue to have 2 type 3 assessments, and the type 3 process will stay the same, just as it has with entering goals. But again, the professional practice rubrics are removed from those 2 type 3 assessments. Each type 3 will be weighted at 15%. And then category C is primarily our related service providers, and Renee will talk a little bit about that.
As you saw from the list earlier that we projected, we moved a great deal of members out of category B into category C, which now will fall under 100% professional practice. Some of the rationale behind this is because we've heard from our RSPs across the district, and we know that the data that they were collecting and using towards evidence is building-wide data that is already being collected. It's being evaluated by the BIT teams, by administration, by grade level teams, and it really is what is used to provide interventions for our students already. So the PJC felt very comfortable in making this move for the majority of our related service providers and putting you in category C in hopes that this will help eliminate some of the stress and pressure you have felt with being compliant and having to put extra data sets in just to be sufficient for your evaluation. So category C now will be based on 100% professional practice. It also includes some members on there who do not have the curriculum to support having a type 2 or type 1 assessment. So some members that you see in category C, it is either because of the students they work with or their lack of classroom roster.
So I think we need to talk now a little bit about what you saw earlier on the slide about the default to proficient. And this is for just the type 1 rating that we have for category A. Again, we did not plan on not having state assessment data available to us this year. And unfortunately, it's going to impact more than 1 year moving forward. When we start doing the type 1, we still need to have a starting point and an ending point to measure growth. And the only way to do that is to look a year behind, kind of like your taxes in some respects. And so for evaluations that we're going to be due for next year, at the end of next year, we would have been looking at data from 18-19 as our baseline to 19-20, which is this year, as the endpoint. And that's because we would need to have a full set of data available for our non-tenured teachers who are due in March and our tenured teachers who are due in May. And we know that state data typically doesn't come in until after the school year is over. So that explains why we had to go back 1 year in this case. Now, because we don't have state data this year, that's going to impact next year's rating, and that will impact the following year's rating as well, because we won't have that baseline that we need. So we're hoping that by the time we get to 2023, evaluations that are due in 2023, we'll be able to have a start point and end point, and we'll be having discussions about value tables and how we will determine the ratings for the different groups in the type 1 when we get to that point. So we know that this decision will be out there, and we had already started talking about it moving forward. Right now, we're just on pause because of the lack of state data that we have. So I know there are a number of people out there that are saying to themselves, okay, well, what about me? I am due next year. What happens with my evaluation? What do I use? And so the PJC went through a number of scenarios and considered a number of options for what that might look like for people who are mid-cycle. And so I'll try to give you options and describe what those options would look like. So for our category A teachers, we wanted to be able to provide you choice. So with that type 3, we'll continue to allow for a choice between the 2 years of your cycle for your student growth. So you can pick your year 1 type 3 or your year 2 type 3. That's up to you. Now, looking at that 5% for next year, because everybody will move to this 5% next year, we wanted to provide a choice. And so what we did was we said, you can use that default rating next year if you would like to proficient for that 5%, or you can use your type 2 from this year if you had a complete type 2 for your 5% there. So we wanted to be able to provide an option for you if you're mid-cycle. And then for those people who are in category B, we're continuing on with what we've done before. You can use your type 3s from this year, or you can use your type 3 for next year if you're going to be inputting a type 3 for next year. So those are your options for category A and category B. For those people who are going into category C, we're just automatically moving you to 100% professional practice. So we'll be you'll still have your student growth in your account, but you won't need to use it because we'll be at 100% professional practice. Okay.
So the next decision here, as you saw in the categories at the bottom, student growth is going to be waived for non-tenured teachers that are in year 1 and year 2. Some of the reasoning behind this, as you heard Judy say, is that we are already a year behind with our data and when we'll actually be able to utilize that data for our evaluations. And we also know the burden that first and second year teachers have with the mentor-mentee program and just getting used to the district and meeting guidelines and expectations. So we want them to focus on their practice, and their evaluations will be based on 100% professional practice only for years 1 and year 2.
Okay, the next decision was with respect to tenured educators. Renee, do you want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Sure. So this decision, fourth decision here is tenured educator student growth requirements for their type 3. So moving forward, actually in the past we've all been required to do a type 3 every single year, whether it was our summative year or not our summative year. The PJC has made the decision to only require a type 3 during your summative year. We recommend that educators continue to do a type 3 every year, but you do not need to have one for your non-summative year. It is optional. You would be able to choose between both if you still continue to do one every year, but you will have the choice this time moving forward that you only need to have one type 3 for your summative year for your evaluation.
Okay. The last decision that was made was with respect to the required informal observation. So you all know that for tenured teachers, there are 2 observations that are required in a 2-year period. One is a formal observation and one is an informal observation. A couple of years ago, we made the decision to add an informal observation to ensure that people were observed and that their practice was getting some feedback in each year of their summative cycle. This year, we made the decision for a variety of reasons to go back and remove that second required informal observation from the tenured teacher cycle. So given the fact that we know we have a new culture, a more evolved culture of coaching and continuous improvement and Friday meetings in some buildings with respect to informal walkthroughs, we're going to honor that by knowing that we are going to continue those types of practices, but only formalize, so to speak, that informal observation once in a tenured cycle.
Of course, there are options by both the evaluator and to have additional informal observations, just as there may be an additional formal observation if warranted. And so that is certainly the minimum. And then obviously there can be additional informal observations added throughout the course of that cycle. Okay. So in closing, we really truly want to express our gratitude for everything that you're doing, whether we were under normal circumstances or now that we're certainly far from normal. We see all the hard work that you're doing and we truly appreciate all of your efforts. We know we're in the home stretch of summer, school year coming to an end. It's almost summertime and it's bittersweet because the end of the year certainly doesn't have that where we get to see our students goodbye, and we're met with more somber things like packing up our classrooms in an empty building or seeing our students drive up and pick up their supplies and their materials in a paper bag. And that's not the way that the end of the school year should be. And so we certainly are thinking of you, and we know these times are hard, but at the same time, we hope that you're looking forward to a little relief with the official school year coming to an end. If this information felt like a lot for you, that's okay. Take a deep breath. Just stay calm, and then you can seek clarity from your rep, your evaluator, anyone on the PJC, and we will help you to make sure that you understand all of the information that you need, and we'll do that again in the fall as well. So thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for your time and watching this webinar. We appreciate you all, and we wish you to have a safe and healthy summer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.